Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Coffman. I want to welcome everyone to our 17th installment of the Torah portion of the week. We're holding by Parshas Yisro, a packed parsha. We got the story of the Ten Commandments, God giving the Torah, single greatest event in the history of the world, right? Especially for the Jewish people. A few things that I think are I'm going to try and hit in the parsha. First thing is, if you look at the beginning of the parsha, chapter 18. It says Yisro, or as he's known and translated here, it's Jethro, right? But it's called Yisro. Yisro was the minister of Midian, father-in-law of Moshe, heard everything that God did to Moshe and to Israel, his people, that Hashem had taken Israel out of Egypt. Now, that's a pretty loaded statement because the Torah here says that Yisro himself heard what happened to Moshe, heard what happened to the Jewish people, and Yisro now comes, and he comes, right? So the idea, the whole question, where does Yisro appear, right? That means, does he appear before the giving of the Torah or after the giving of the Torah? So you might say from here, it would seem he appears before the giving of the Torah. There are a lot of proofs, right, that seem to say that he comes on the scene at that point. But keep in mind, the Torah is written, but not exactly as things transpire. So in other words, you could have something written in the Torah, right, but it could have happened much earlier. For instance, one good example is if you look at Parshas Yisro. Right, Parshas Yisro, in chapter 30, right, talks about the sin of the golden calf. So, chapter 30, verse 11, it says, God spoke to Moshe, saying, when you take a census of the children of Israel according to the numbers, every man shall give Hashem an atonement for his soul, counting them so there will not be a plague among them when counting them, etc., etc. And eventually we get to the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. Commentaries over there ask, what in the world are they doing there? Right? Why does the Torah bring it down there? It happened much earlier. Right? It happened shortly after the giving of the Torah. Right? It happened shortly over here. It definitely should have been placed here. So, if you hold, like Rashi says many times in the Torah, Ein Mukdam, Ein Mucha b'Torah. There's no before, there's no after. It means that all these events definitely occurred as God spoke to Moshe. Moshe wrote it down. Remember, one of the 13 principles is that Moshe is not allowed to change anything in the Torah, so he's basically a scribe, and he's the greatest of all prophets. How do we know he's the greatest of all prophets? Because God gives his stamp of approval through the giving of the Torah, not just through all the miracles that occurred in Egypt, etc., but God gives him this power to give over exactly what he says. And that's all he is, again, is a scribe. He can't change anything, right? He can't add or subtract, as he's going to say later, right? You don't add or subtract in the Torah, it says in the book of Deuteronomy. So, if he adds or subtracts, that's forbidden, right? That he's not allowed to do. So how do we know Moshe is so great? Because God says, I spoke through Moshe, you tell the Jewish people, I spoke through Moshe, etc. So when we talk about a false prophet is someone who denies any of the Torah, who changes anything that Moshe said. Because the reality is, God gave everything to him, and Moshe gave it over. So Moshe gave it over, and he's not allowed to change it. Therefore, anyone who comes along and says, what Moshe said isn't true, God forbid, or any of this stuff, then he's a false prophet, you kill him. But that's not the topic for tonight, so I'm glad that came out. Nonetheless, we mention this because, even though it mentions Yisro over here, the commentaries are bothered and ask, well, when did he come on the scene? Did he come on the scene before the giving of the Torah or after the giving of the Torah? Tremendous disagreement among the commentaries, bringing a whole slew of proofs either way. But again, that's not going to be the topic. That's not going to be the topic for what we're going to speak about. I just mention that in passing because if you say he's after the giving of the Torah, then why is it mentioned it here? Why is it mentioned it before the giving of the Torah? Because we know later the Torah hasn't been given yet, right? We know it's only going to take another few chapters in order for that to happen. So you could say, well, if he's printed over here, it must be he came before the Torah. But again, what we just mentioned will sort of offset that, because just because it's written down here doesn't mean it happened the exact same time, right? It could have been earlier, could have been later. It just happens to be it's written now. It's written down at this point. But since it's only written down at this point, we have no proof that he necessarily came before, right? That was the point. But here, an interesting point I wanted to make is that he says he heard everything God did to Moses and to Israel, his people. And they took out of the land of Egypt. Simple explanation would be, he heard about all the miracles, right? Heard about the plagues, heard about the splitting of the sea, right? Rashi over here says, what does he hear? He hears the splitting of the sea, and he hears the war of Amalek, right? That was the end of the last chapter, right? With the war of Amalek. So those two things he heard. So then you could ask, what do you mean? That's what he heard. What about everything else? He didn't hear about the plagues. He didn't hear about, he didn't hear about anything else that went on in Egypt. That's all he heard. Right? So one way of explaining, which should be simple explanation, is that he heard everything God did to Moses and Israel's people, that Hashem had taken Israel out of Egypt. So we could say he heard everything. Right? He heard about the plagues, etc. So why does Rashi say he heard the splitting of the sea and the war of Amalek? So you could say that the splitting of the sea could have been inculcated, all the plagues put together. Right? He had blood, frogs, vermin, wild animals, darkness. The last one, the killing of the Bechor, killing of the firstborn, where Pharaoh finally says, okay, just get them out of here, we don't want them anymore, and he lets the Jewish people go. Be that as it may, they go, they wipe out all the wealth of Egypt because they took everything with them. They found benevolence in the eyes of the Egyptians. And since the plague of darkness, they could see. They were able to see, so they knew where all the money and jewels from the Egyptians were. So they said, oh, could I have this? Could I have that? And it's sitting right over here. And they found benevolence in the eyes of the Egyptians. They gave them all their wealth. Right? They went out as God had promised. They were going to not just go out, but they were going to go out very wealthy. With everything that Egypt had to offer. So they take everything, they go. And they move along. What happens? They come to the sea. They come to the sea. Pharaoh changes his mind, starts to run after them. The Jewish people look back. They see the Egyptians in the distance coming after them. They see the sea in front of them. Right? What are they supposed to do? Moshe cries out to God. God splits the sea. So they run into the sea. As it splits, the Egyptians come and we know what happens. So, hearing about the plagues, is one thing. It certainly makes an impression. Nature was overturned in all those plagues. Right? The frogs, locusts, all these, lice, killing of the firstborn, darkness, all these things were above nature. So, because all of them were above nature, and a person hears about it, and he hears about all the miracles, it makes a certain impression. What does he hear? Then he hears the splitting of the sea. Right? So the splitting of the sea, some would want to say occurred because of high tide. Nice east wind, as the Torah says, comes along and splits the sea. So some want to explain, not according to the Torah, that this was high tide, right? We'll explain it according to nature. Others may say all the miracles and all the plagues happened because Saturn was out of orbit. Okay, either you say it's nature that makes sense, or you say, Saturn was out of orbit, and that's why all the miracles, happened with the plagues. Your choice. So, why does that make more of an impression? The Medrash says when the frogs came, there was one big frog. So what did the Egyptians do? They smacked it. And when they smacked it, it split into 2 frogs. Then they smacked that and turned into 4 frogs. They smacked that, turned into 8 frogs. Smacked that, turned into 6, then they multiply by infinity. And that's not a miracle. Darkness where the Jewish people could see, the Egyptians couldn't. And it was so dark they couldn't see anything, no matter how much light they put up. That wasn't a miracle. All the water turning to blood, and the Jews were able to drink water and didn't turn to blood. That wasn't any more of a miracle. So it would seem splitting of the sea is something else. The splitting of the sea goes against all logic. And therefore, you hear something like that, even compared to the other miracles, right? Even if we say all the other miracles are so great and look what happened, and look how God overturned nature for that, that's a tremendous thing. That there's no question. But to take the sea and split it, what does that entail? So you have water flowing straight. As the Medrash says, the water went to the sides. Universal Studios not included. Water went to the side and stood up like this. Right? There were 12 lines. They walked in, right, for each of the tribes, had different lines, but it was suspended animation. Right? The water's holding up here. Jewish people, Jewish people walk in. 2 million people go through, the Egyptians behind them. And the water's still there. The water's still there. Their feet don't get muddy. Imagine from the bottom of the ocean. You would think there'd be like a little bit of residue. Their feet, they're walking through, their feet get muddy. No. Egyptians come in, going after the Jewish people. They had problems. Chariots hit rocks. It was muddy. For the Jewish people, it wasn't. Jewish people come out. Again, suspended animation. They turn around. Whammo. Water comes in. I would think, again, my own personal observation, if you would hear about all these different miracles, of all the plagues, why wouldn't that make such an impression? It makes a tremendous impression. All these different things that went on as we explained. But when you compare it to the splitting of the sea, even though he didn't see it, but he hears about it, that boggles the mind. So that's one aspect. Right? He heard all the other miracles. But this miracle was something that once he heard about all the miracles, he said, that's an unbelievable thing. The sea split? Suspended animation? The Egyptians come and then the sea comes back as the Jewish people go on to dry land? That's beyond. The other miracles will give a 8.5, 9. This is a 10 plus. Possibly one explanation. Second thing he hears, Rashi says, is the war of Amalek. Now again, simple explanation is he heard everything. Right? Don't forget. It says he heard everything that Hashem had taken Israel out of Egypt. What does that mean? Yeah, how'd they come out? What happened? So that he must have heard. He heard about the plagues. But these two made more of an impression. What about the war of Amalek? The war of Amalek is interesting. Who are the people of Amalek? They don't believe in God. They don't believe in anything divine. No Hashgacha Pratis, no divine providence. Miracles for sure they don't believe in. Right? They brought doubt to the world whether, there's a God or not. Right? That's one of the terrible things that they brought to the world. So now you have to imagine the people of Amalek are not interested in fighting one-on-one. As we remember by Purim, Amalek fights against the poor, against the ones that can't defend themselves. Right? They're not going head to head. What do they do over here? Imagine what the Jewish people have gone through. How many years were they in Egypt? How many years did they suffer? How much did they have to work and sweat and be crushed physically? You might say, well, that built them up. That made them much stronger. No. The physical work, just the opposite, made them weaker. I'm not talking spiritually here. Very simply. They got crushed under the work. So they're coming out, and God does not want to lead them the way of the Philistines. Right? That we spoke about, because he was afraid if they would go directly there and the Philistines would declare war, they want to run back to Egypt. But they did have a war. Right? At the end of last week's Parsha, there was a war with Amalek. So you have to ask the obvious question. If you know the history of a nation, current history, they've been enslaved by the world power. No one in their history who had ever been enslaved by Egypt ever got out. Except one. Right? Except the Jewish people. They didn't just come out, the Torah tells us. They came out in a big way. They decimated the entire country. Right? Decimated the trees. Animals were killed. Thousands of animals were killed. There was no water. They took all their wealth. The country was decimated by all these plagues. Not only that, but they come out, they cross the sea closes on the Egyptians, and all the Egyptians die. Jewish people march forward in the desert. They say, we don't believe in miracles. But it happened. They must have heard about it. Doesn't make an impression. So they say, we hate the Jewish people so much because God's going to give them the Torah and God's going to make them their chosen nation, etc. They said, we don't care. We're going to fight against them. We're going to take them on. We don't want them around us. Now, logically speaking, and Amalek doesn't work on logic per se. Now, maybe they believe in what they can see, what they can't see they don't believe in, sort of like the Greeks. But they didn't believe in supernatural at all. They didn't even give that, a thought. The Greeks believed in supernatural. So they were a step ahead. But, if you're going to go to war against someone, hit them when they're down. Hit them when they're weak. You don't hit them when they're demolishing people miraculously. When they decimate the world power, and destroy their economy, destroy everything in the country, and go out with all the wealth, why in the world are you going to start up with them? Doesn't make any logical sense. Amalek is very good at starting up with the weak, the infirmed. Not going to go head on, with a powerful army. They're a bunch of cowards. Right? Just like the Germans, Yamach Shemam, and their name be blotted out. When they attacked, they went to war. Against other nations. But when they attacked the Jewish people, they didn't do it that way. Jewish people didn't have a homeland. They didn't have their own army. They were a world power. And they just rounded them up and, killed them. It wasn't a fair fight. Jews didn't even know what hit them. Even if they wanted to fight, it was already too late. Except for some uprisings here and there. They didn't even know what hit them. But they had no way to fight. Wasn't like it was an option. Germans weren't stupid. Sealed the borders. Didn't let anyone come in, go out. They given an opportunity. Got totally snuffed out. Right? Germans no different. They are, as many hold, an offspring of Amalek. Just in the sheer brutality of what they did. So be that as it may, what do? They attack. Jewish people know anything about war? They don't know anything. They've been enslaved. God's trying to make them into a nation. To accept the Torah. What do they know about warfare? Right, but Amalek attacks. And they don't care what happened before. They don't care about all the miracles. Split into the sea. Even if it did happen, they don't care. They use a mashal. They use a parable over here. What's it comparable to? It's comparable to a burning hot bath. What happens when the first person jumps into that bath? They get burned. Badly. If not die. Second one jumps in, same thing. Third one jumps in, same thing. Fourth one jumps in, same thing. By the time you get to 10, 20, 30, 40, it already starts to cool down. So by the time more people jump in, the bath is already warm. So too over here. They know they're going to jump in. A lot of them are going to get slaughtered. But they don't care because if someone's on that type of roll, they're not on that roll forever. Right? It's gvuli. It's got a boundary for how long that can last. So be that as it may, they don't care. They'll lose hundreds, thousands. But eventually, they're banking on the fact that the Jewish people are going to fold. They're going to do something, etc. They won't be able to fight back. They're too weak or whatever. And eventually, they should be able to take them over. Logically speaking, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. People willing to give up their lives for the sake of the future. Right? There are strategies in war where, you go in to take over a place, people are going to die. You're going to have fodder for the first people who are going to die, and then the waves come in and they hopefully take over. And they win. Right? So Amalek was no different. They said, so what if they're on a big roll? Yeah, we'll calm them down. Again, logically speaking, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because you want to mess with people who are weaker than you. Who aren't prepared. Right? Essentially, that's what they do. Because, again, the Jewish people, it's not like they know anything about warfare. They're coming out. They said, finally have freedom. They don't have the Egyptians breathing down their neck. They don't have to work so hard. Okay, they're in the desert. There's no water. There's no food. They have other trials and tribulations. God's working on their emunah the whole time. Their belief in Him to make them into a nation, to be able to serve Him. But Amalek knew what mentality they had and how weak they were. And even though they were on the biggest roll of their life, Amalek says, we don't care, we're going to attack him. And that's why by Purim, we'll see, there's a mitzvah to wipe out that idea. We don't know who Amalek is today. We can't wipe them out physically. But we can wipe out what they brought to the world. This idea of, God forbid, saying there is no God in the world. There is no divine prophet. There is nothing. You should wear the t-shirt that says, stuff happens. That's the world. Some better, some worse. There's no rhyme or reason for anything. It's not like God created the world and He left. There is no God. He didn't do anything. They got lucky in Egypt. Saturn was out of orbit. High tide. All kinds of things happened. Just a coincidence. That's what we have to... When we talk about uprooting Amalek, we can't do it physically because we don't know who Amalek is today. Uprooting them means I uproot their idea, what they brought into the world. What did they bring into the world? This idea of doubt. This idea of cynicism. This idea there is no judge or judgment. Stuff happens. That's it. You're at the wrong place, wrong time. Sorry. That's how it works by them. That's why Haman dies by his own motto. Because when he's pinned down by an angel in Queen Esther's bed, and Achashverosh walks in, is what? You're going to take my queen in front of me? And he's pinned down by angels. God opened his eyes and he saw angels. But he can't say there are angels pinning me down. Doesn't believe in the supernatural. Killed by his own motto. That was it. Achashverosh says, send him out. Kill him. It's a very hard thing for Achashverosh to do. Because both of them were sort of two peas in a pod. Both had this hatred for the Jewish people. That there was nothing to talk about. Now, again, that's more for Purim, but the point is that he's killed by his own motto. So that's the second thing Yisro says. What did he see? He saw the war of Amalek. War of Amalek is greater than the miracles. It's greater than the plagues. That's something to be mentioned more? Maybe. As we mentioned, look what the people of Amalek did. Or tried to do. No one's going to do that. You're going to wait for things to calm down. A nation gets decimated, the sea splits, and all the people there are killed within. Thousands of Egyptians, the whole army wiped off the face of the map. And the Jewish nation moves on to go to Mount Sinai to get the Torah. They're not going to mess with that. My language, you got to be off your cotton picking head. I'm always fond of saying, there's a 614th commandment. Don't be stupid. What in the world are you going to fight against a nation that has every miracle happening for them and nature being turned upside down in order to destroy their enemy? You want to start up with that? Good luck. 9.9 or 10 times out of 10, you put that in a supercomputer, you lose. Only question is by how much. See, but the people of Amalek, as we mentioned, didn't care. They don't care about odds. They don't care about miracles. They don't believe in any of this. They got lucky. Right? It's like shooting craps. You hit 10 in a row. You're lucky. Not divine providence. They don't believe in any of that. So when Yisro heard, it made an impression. You got a nation that's going to come along and try and fight these people? Even though they don't really know anything about warfare, probably. They're on the biggest roll of their life, and you're going to go up against them? Good luck. That made an impression. So those two things are singled out, I think, more than the plagues and anything else that went on in Egypt. But let's take it one step further. What does the Torah tell us? Torah says, Yisro heard. Well, what about everybody else? Yisro heard, and what did he do? He came to be Megayer. He came to convert after hearing this. It boggled his mind so much, and he tried every idol that there was in the world. He was the main priest in Midian, and he left it all to convert. But my question is, what about everybody else? Should have been thousands, millions of converts at that point. If you see a nation like that on the Jewish nation on such a roll, whole world should have converted. Right, but who really converted? So you had some Egyptians that converted, came out with the Jewish people. Difference of opinion if it was just the Egyptians or other nations, or some of other nations came and converted. They made up the mixed multitude. The Erev Rav. The Erev Rav was the one who made the Egel, made the sin of the golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu thought it was a good idea to have them convert and come. God didn't think it was such a good idea, but God said, fine, you want them to come. Let them come. Right? So, interesting, in the time of David and Solomon, there weren't allowed converts. Why? There weren't allowed converts because Jewish people were on top. They have a temple, God's presence. There's very little free will. So if there's very little free will and there are all these miracles going on, you can't convert. The time when the Messiah comes, it'll be the same thing. You'll be seeing miracle after miracle. Say, I want to convert. I want to be part of this. It's going to be too late. So whoever's in the process of conversion now, better finish it up. Right? Messiah's knocking on the door. A lot of things going on in front of our eyes and behind the scenes. It could happen anytime. Months, years, but he's knocking on the door. Be that as it may, you could ask two questions. All right, the first question, which is pretty obvious, is where's everybody else? Why is it only he saw and nobody else? They also heard about it. The world heard about it. A little bit harder to get the information out. Takes longer to get there. Right? You have no cell phones, no internet access, all this. So it's going to be a little more difficult to get to. But even if it's more difficult to get to, they certainly heard. First question. Second question is, why in the world was Yisro allowed to convert? We just said, you're not allowed to convert if you see miracles. Right? If it's clear they're open miracles, and this was very clear. No one denies they weren't open miracles. Again, unless you hold Saturn was out of orbit. Or the Jews ate all the same hallucinogenic mushroom in the desert and they made all this up. That could be. Right? So we'll put away fantasy for a second. We'll try and talk reality. So reality is, he shouldn't have been allowed to convert. No free will. Alright, he didn't see the miracles per se, he heard about them. As we say, ein doime shmiya l'riyah. There's no comparison between hearing about something, seeing it with your own eyes. That's true. So it goes down a number of levels. Okay. Even if that's true, you hear about something like that, it's very hard to just push it aside. Doesn't matter how far away you are. Someone hears that, I should want to be part of it. So, we'll answer the first question first. Where was everybody else? So I already gave half the answer. The answer is, ein doime shmiya l'riyah. They didn't see it. They only heard about it. So if you're 6,000 miles away, or 500 miles away. It's like you're years away. There's no residue left over. Not like you see, I see all the lights flying away. Or I see all the wild animals going and doing what they're doing. You don't see that. It's too far. So even if they heard about it, it didn't make as much an impression. It just means, and things really haven't changed all that much over the millennia, it just means that we're very shallow. If we hear something, what's the first thing we're going to say? How do you know? Maybe it's not true. Maybe it's exaggerated. A whole nation came out of Egypt? Nah, come on. There weren't that many people there in the first place. Maybe just a few escaped. Right? So we have historical, sociological proofs of the Jewish people being there and the numbers, and right, strictly from the Torah perspective. Right, when the Torah gives numbers, not exaggerated here. 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children, puts it about between 2 and 3 million. Such a nation to escape and to go out is pretty miraculous in and of itself. So, they hear about it, doesn't make an impression. I mean, how many times do we hear something, even if it's a miracle, how much of an impression does it make? Well, let's say, even if you live in the land of Israel, and you hear about all these missile attacks that went on a few years ago, and, this miracle after miracle. They hit open areas, and these missiles are supposed to be pretty specific. They hit open areas, they hit places where people aren't. Yeah, there were some people killed, no question. Majority of these missiles were either knocked down by the Patriot missile, or they hit open areas. Vast majority. And the people they were aiming for were only a few kilometers away. Now, hearing about it, if you went through it, and you survived it, then you have much more to lose. Because if you witness an open miracle and it doesn't change you, then later on it's going to be more catastrophic. Because if God does an open miracle, and God shows the world His might, etc., you witness it and it doesn't make an impression, that's bad. It's got to do something. If it doesn't do anything, then God's going to make it worse. Because what do? He just wasted a miracle on you. So if you live in the land and it happened to you, it makes an impression. You see God acting in a very real way. If you hear about it 6,000 miles away, or you see the end result of it, whatever it is it any less of a miracle? No. The only question is, how do I apply it to my life? How does it make an impression? So if you tell me you can't see it, you're not around, makes less of an impression. But today we don't have the luxury. Today everything is, instantaneous. 5 minutes after something happens, it's already gone viral. Someone's got a picture of it. It's an unbelievable thing. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing, but it's news is instantaneous. Even so, when you witness something like that, you see something like that, does it change us? Does it make an impression? And again, I'm making it worse. Because we're asking over here if you saw it. If you didn't see it, I can understand. You heard about it. See, but once you hear about it, the first thing we'll try and do is negate it. The first thing we'll try and say is, oh, it wasn't such a big deal. It was, it was this, it was that. We'll try to explain it away. But see, if it's something that's obvious, and you can't explain it away, if I hear about it and it doesn't make an impression, that's bad. Right? That we're going to agree is bad. So, even if the rest of the world heard, the question is, did it make an impression or not? Obviously it didn't. Right? Because if it would have, you would have had thousands of people that would have converted. Or wanted to convert. Which leads into the second question, how was Yisro allowed to convert? After all, when he comes, he may have an ulterior motive. What's his ulterior motive? It's just all the miracles. I'm in. I want to be part of it. Until Moshe saw, what he was asking and how he was asking and what he wanted, he could tell that he was sincere. But there's another issue. The other issue is that he has a small amount of time to convert. Where are the Jewish people headed right now? If it's before the giving of the Torah. Well, just gave it away. They're going to get the Torah. They're going to Mount Sinai. So if they're going to Mount Sinai, they haven't got the Torah yet. They haven't got the Torah yet, he's still a candidate. Even though the Ramchal says it was a much earlier time that God had sort of closed things off. That if they wanted to be part of the Jewish people, they had a chance. Otherwise, they didn't have a chance. Right? But that's still not a problem over here because God hadn't given the Torah yet. So the only thing is that if God hadn't given the Torah, so he's a candidate. But if he's a candidate, how do we know he's really sincere? How do we know, in essence, he was doing it for the right reason? Right? That is the question. So my Rebbe here mentions so he mentions that Moshe Rabbeinu saw, right? He saw through him what he wanted. So how does he know? So says Mori Rebbe Rav Gomer Moshe Stor Moshlita. So my Rebbe here says, may be well. My Rebbe here says that he comes to convert after he hears about the miracles, but he shouldn't have been accepted. But Moshe and Aaron and Jewish people come out of Egypt, and what happened? Where was he before this? Yisro was in Midian. Yisro is the high priest of Midian, the head honcho, right? The big macher. He's all of them combined, the big kahuna, so to speak. What does he do? He leaves. He leaves Midian, comes to Moshe and says, I want in. Moshe says, I don't understand. Torah says, you see all the miracles, you can't convert. Why should we let you convert? But what does Yisro do? Yisro left. He left idolatry. He forgot all about idolatry. He forgot he was a big kahuna. He forgot he tried every idol in the world. And he comes and says, I want in. He says, I have to be part of the Jewish people. Moshe and Aaron, from seeing that, they say, okay. Because he had everything to lose. He's the big cheese. He's the big fish. He's the big macher. In Midian. And what does he do? He says, now I want to be part of the Jewish people. Forget everything. It was all falsehood. It was all lies. It was a travesty of a mockery of a sham. My language. So he says, I'll do whatever it takes. I'm leaving everything I know. I'm ready to be part of the Jewish people. So, because of that, they saw that what he wanted to do was for real. That him being part of the Jewish people was a real thing. It wasn't for any ulterior motive. It wasn't because of all the miracles. He believed it was a real thing. He was leaving everything else behind. Also, it would seem he wants to join the Jewish people. And it says later, that Rashi brings down, he also modeled himself. He also did bris milah, circumcision. So, his intentions were real. Because his intentions were real, he was allowed to join the Jewish people. So when it comes to conversion in general, as we mentioned, if they're open miracles, you can't join. Because your free will is basically taken away. And the fact that anyone would want to convert when there are no open miracles, either, as I would always say, either you're the real deal or you're crazy, or both. Because if you go through Jewish history, after the destruction of the temple, Jews have been down for a long time. You tell me, now it's much easier to be a Jew than ever before. Right? With schools, yeshivas, girls' schools, kosher food, communities all over the world. Right? In many ways, it's a lot easier to be part of the Jewish people. I mean, there are other issues, obviously. But in general, being part of the Jewish people shouldn't be so difficult in today's age. So then why should more people want to convert? It's obvious. It's a lot to do. A lot of mitzvahs to do. We're going to be very different from the other nations. That's why the Torah here says, you're going to be my chosen nation. You're going to be a nation of Kohanim, of high priests. I'm going to distinguish you between the nations. You're going to be different. Everyone's going to know you're different. Again, different, not better. What makes us different than everybody else? By what we eat. Right? We keep kosher. We keep Shabbos. We keep the festivals. We dress differently. Right? We do things differently. Torah doesn't say we're better. Just means we have more obligation. We're separate from the other nations for one reason. Because God gave us a Torah. So, the Jewish people have been down for a long time. We don't have a temple today. 70% into marriage. You have 13 million Jews almost know nothing about Judaism. We're our own worst enemy. Person lives in a Jewish community, they still want to be Jewish after seeing how Jews act. Either they're the real deal or crazy. Right? We have our own problems. People in jail, fraud, other things. That's why when a person comes in front of a rabbinical court and they say you understand what the Jewish people have been through and what they continue to go through, etc., and a person says, yeah, I'll do it anyway, it doesn't matter, so then they're the real deal. But if you look at the Jewish people in general, throughout history, anyone who wants to join, they're going to be out of their minds. Especially what's going on today. So there must be only one reason why a person wants to do it, because they believe it's the absolute truth. Because if it wouldn't be the absolute truth, no one would do it. And even if it is the absolute truth, less than 20% of people who start the process actually finish. Either it's family, it's money, it's community, it's all of the above and more. So Yisro is the ultimate convert. He comes and says, I'm giving up everything. I don't care what the repercussions are. I just lost being the big kahuna. Okay? Loses everything to be part of the Jewish nation. That's an amazing thing. Most non-Jews going through this process do lose a lot going through the process. Doesn't have to be, but a lot of times it is. Family, jobs, other things, they have to move to a Jewish community. It's real hard. But the ultimate answer is going to be, isn't it worth it? With all the pain, right? No pain, no gain. With all the pain, isn't it worth it? So that everyone would have to answer for themselves. But if you're the real deal, you know what the answer will be. Regardless of what will happen. So the whole world's asleep and only the unique individuals who want to be part of the Jewish people will. Because if the Jewish people, we'll end with this, if the Jewish people were on the biggest row of their lives, and people heard about it, only a real small fraction, minute fraction of people actually come and convert, then the whole world's asleep. That's okay. We're not looking for millions of converts. But still, it boggles the mind why there should have been so few people that actually came. I also give conversion classes and Noahide classes. Anyone interested, take a look at my Facebook page, my Facebook fan page at Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, my Noahide page at Beyond Noahides. Also, I have a blog, rabbichaimcoffman.blogspot.com, RABBICHAIMCOFFMAN.blogspot.com, and everyone have a great Shabbos.